Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm your host, Brian Keane, best-selling author of the book, The Fitness Mindset and Rewire Your Mindset, here to help you by deconstructing expert guests on all things health, fitness and mindset. Today's guest is Chris Williamson on getting over the fear of criticism, making sure your friends don't suck, and the I'll be happy win fallacy. A lot of you will recognize Chris from the very first season of Love Island. I can't say that I found Chris on that. It was through actually Ben Coomer's podcast that I first heard Chris, and then jumped over to his podcast, the Modern Wisdom podcast, that dives into leading experts all over the world on different topics. So he's had everyone from ex-Army Marines to porn stars to top ranked poker players in the world to health and fitness experts. So a wide range of guests on his podcast. And in today's episode, we dive heavy into the mindset side of things. So finding your purpose, becoming more confident by deprogramming or unlearning the thoughts that don't support you anymore, building the stadium floor mindset. So the mindset that the person that's in the stadium doing the thing, whatever that is, losing weight, trying to change your body composition, trying to better yourself in any way, is always going to be stronger than the person in the stands or the Monday morning quarterback, and how to build that stadium floor mindset. We also speak about asking yourself, are you an introvert or do your friends just suck? And how to let go of negative friends. So if you're somebody that struggled with that area of life where your circle of 5 people, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, if your circle of 5 isn't that strong, how to potentially let go of some of those negative friends. And we also talk about why you don't value most people's opinions, you fear their criticism, and how to get over the fear of criticism. So without further ado, this is a heavy mindset episode, talking everything from building confidence to making sure that you're going after the goals that you've set yourself, to being mindful of your ambition and your desire, and not making desire the contract you keep with yourself to be unhappy until you find the thing that you want or until you get the thing that you want. So without further ado, here's Chris Williamson on getting over the fear of criticism, making sure your friends don't suck, and the I'll be happy win fallacy. Enjoy. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today with my guest, Chris Williamson. Chris is the host of the Modern Wisdom podcast, owns an events company in the UK, and coaches people to get more out of life. His platforms talk about how to live a good life, finding your purpose, maximising human performance, productivity, fitness, and psychology. His personal passion lies in learning about himself and the world around him. I'm really looking forward to talking all things fitness, health, and mindset in today's episode. Chris, I've been listening to your podcast, binging it in the lead up to this episode, so I'm really looking forward to chatting. Welcome to my podcast.
Thank you, man. It's nice to be on the other side of the mic for once.
Yeah, man, I'm really looking forward to diving into your story. And there's a couple of topics, as we mentioned just before we went on air, that we're going to dive into. But before we do that, can you tell everybody listening a little bit about yourself and kind of what led you on your current path? Just because you have a fascinating backstory from kind of Love Island, Take Me Out, to interviewing some of the world's leading experts in their field. So tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so I'm Chris Williamson. I'm an entrepreneur and podcast host from the northeast of the UK, Geordie Shore, Newcastle. I went to uni in Newcastle, sat next to someone, told him I was skint, and we started flyering together. That person ended up being my business partner, and 14 years later, we still haven't got rid of each other. So I've been best mates, groomsmen at his wedding, and through thick and thin of all of the ups and downs of a business. Stood on the front door of 1,000 club nights, watched 1 million drunk people go in and out of them. I was a party boy for a long time, sort of big name on campus, big dick around town, classic sort of young, full of testosterone and ego 20-year-old guy. Then decided I wanted to have a little crack at reality TV, so went on Take Me Out, got to meet Paddy McGuinness, got taken home by the Spanish military police in Fernando's because I woke up on the central reservation of Tenerife's largest motorway, which tells you everything you need to know about how I was partying. Then a couple of years later, I was the first person through the doors of Love Island Season 1. Another very unique experience. Not many things left that you can do that only a couple of hundred people have done, as fewer people have been on Love Island than been to the top of Everest. I'm not equating the two, but my point is that it's rare that there's something you can do now that not many other people have. Throughout all of this, continue to run my business. And then about just after Love Island, I kind of realized I wasn't fully aligned really with my true self, my true interests, and went on a big fat self-inquiry expedition. Went out to Thailand on my own, went out to Bali on my own, spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours listening to mindful and emotionally intelligent content in a desperate attempt to try and work out what the hell was going on inside. And that led me to start my own show, Modern Wisdom, which is now 250 episodes in. We've had over 100 New York Times bestsellers, James Clear, Robert Greene, Ryan Holiday, Seth Godin. I've had a porn star on. I've had a guy who's trying to message extraterrestrials. So it's a broad spectrum. And through that and through spending a lot of time thinking and reflecting and learning, I feel like I've made some really, really good progress over the last 5 years. And the goal is to try and help other people to get from where I was to where I am. I'm not by no means the finished article, but I know I'm significantly better, and there's so many potholes and problems and issues that I encountered that I could have got past if only I'd had the right insight. And that's really what sort of gasses me up and fires me up every day to continue to produce content and record podcasts and put stuff out. And that brings me right up to this moment talking to you on your podcast.
I love it. And I want to park on that for a second, Chris, just because you talked about traveling there, and obviously you came back, started the Modern Wisdom podcast, and you're doing what you're doing now. And there's a lot of people listening who are struggling to find their purpose. That's the language that I hear you use regularly. What advice do you generally offer to people when they feel either lost or they're feeling unsettled or a little bit restless? Because I know that was from listening to your podcast, it's something that you've been through, as you said, a journey of self-discovery. What advice do you offer people who ask you a similar question about finding themselves or finding their purpose?
Firstly, it's not meant to be easy. I think that's something really important that everyone needs to remember. You see people on TV, sports stars or singers or professional musicians or whatever it might be, and you think, wow, look at them living their logos, enacting themselves into the real world. They're so in motion and perfect, and they've found their calling. Why can't I find mine? It's like, not everybody gets to find theirs easily. So firstly, it might take some work. Secondly, looking at what do you want to want is the first question that you need to ask yourself. Now, a lot of people think I have a problem with the fact they don't have a sense of purpose or meaning. The way to work out if that's the case is, are you excited to get out of bed or are you not? If you have purpose and meaning in your life, you are so gassed to get out of bed that nothing's going to keep you in there. Whereas if you go into a job that you don't like, or you're in a relationship you're not too keen on, or you're living in a place that doesn't really excite you, all of those things are going to force you to stay in bed. So that's a good heuristic to work out whether it's a problem. And then in terms of advice, man, you need to find some voices that speak to you. It might be your podcast. It might be mine. It might be Jordan Peterson. It might be Sam Harris. It might be Joe Rogan. It might be anybody else. There is an entire internet of free information and people who have spent time making sense of an incredibly chaotic world. And finding meaning is the most important thing that you can do in your life. But the first few questions to ask yourself are, what do you want to want? Not what do you want, because what you want is probably decided by the social group you're in, and maybe the way that you dealt with some past traumas and your genetic predisposition. The research continues to show just how important genes are in shaping the human that you have become. You are more like your parents than anything else, and twins that are separated at birth are still like their biological parents and nothing like their environment. So you need to concede and understand that there are a lot of things that you need to get past in order to become the person that you want to, if you're not that person already. Okay, what do I want to want? Think about it. Spend some time, sit down and write. What is it? What would an ideal life look like for me? Okay, now how would I go about getting that? It sounds so basic, but so many people will have a problem of meaninglessness or a lack of purpose in their life, having never actually done the work to work out what it is that they want to want.
And never having asked the right question. As you said, what do you want to want? And you mentioned, I love that in terms of finding your purpose, that it's not supposed to be easy. And as you ask better questions, one of my mentors used to always tell me that, smart people have great answers, geniuses have great questions. And I think what do you want to want is a great question. But you mentioned social circles there, and I definitely want to pivot into this, because I think from my experience in my own personal life, and definitely with people listening to the podcast for who I listen to and who I'm talking to on social media, etc., they struggle with the social circle side of things. And I think finding your purpose, even though it can dive into different areas that we might talk about today, like, relationships with alcohol and just life hacks in general. But you put up a post in early December about, are you introverted or do your friends just suck? I absolutely loved this title. I loved this post. Can you expand a little bit on that? And then we'll take it in a couple of different directions.
Yeah. Groups are messy, man. We're a social species, but the way that our genes work to ensure that we're always playing these status games, these hierarchy games, keeping track, this what's called reciprocal altruism, which is the basis for resentment and friendliness. And you're always keeping track of who owes who what and where you sit in the hierarchy. And it is not an easy thing to be a social creature. And the problem of that is that you don't have an unlimited bottomless pool of friends. And if you have a non-typical set of interests, perhaps you are more introspective than most people, or perhaps you have more of an interest in health and fitness, or more of an interest in psychology, or more of an interest in physics, or more of an interest in whatever it might be. If you have non-typical interests, you will find fewer and fewer people that are like you. And given the choice between honesty with the group and acceptability within the group, most people choose the latter, because they're terrified of not having a support structure. And rightly so, we are social creatures. But you can make a go of it on your own. You can embrace, and this goes back to the purpose and meaning thing, because you can only find your purpose and meaning if you fully discover who you are in your essence. Like, what is your truth? And you can often tell this with people who don't have very reliably continuous opinions. You'll all have that friend who you ask a question about one person one day and a question about that same person in a couple of weeks, and they flip-flop between the two because they don't actually know what their opinion is. And that was me for a very, very long time. I didn't know what I believed in. I didn't really know. I just said things so that I would get a good response from people. And I think a big part of that was I had a mismatch between the people that I was around and the person that I truly was. And the problem with that was that I was playing a persona. So I had this big meta character, big dick around town, big name on campus, party boy. So I found other people that were like that. And I made friends with other people that were like that. But that wasn't truly me. So I was never going to find connection. And you can see now that all of these layers, these tighter and tighter circles of confusion and chaos, inevitably it's going to cause problems for everyone. So yeah, I think a lot of the time the group that you are aligned with, it gets grandfathered in from the people that you were friends with in primary school, and you're still mates with them. Like, why are you mates with them? You're mates with them simply out of familiarity. Now, loyalty goes part of the way, but if that person doesn't align with who you want to be in life, they need to go. Like, the quicker that you can let go of people that do not make you a better person and find people that do, the quicker you will be happier. This is something that everyone knows, and it's almost trite to say, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. But how long has it been since you genuinely added a bunch of new people into your life quickly? People that have got growth mindsets, people that can teach you things that you don't already know. You can sit down with someone, a mate that you've known for 15 years, and predict every word that comes out of their mouth. You can sit down with someone you've never met before, and everything that comes out of their mouth can be brand new. Situation 1, I would be introverted. I'm bored of what you've got to say because I've heard it all before. And maybe I don't even agree with it. And maybe I don't even like it, and it actually makes me upset or angry or resentful or bitter when you say it. Second person, I can't wait to hear what you've got to say next. All I'm doing is asking questions. Oddly, sometimes being selfless in a conversation can be the most selfish thing you can do, because the more questions you ask, the more information you get out of someone. You know all the things that you're going to say, but you don't know anything they're going to say, so keep on asking questions. But again, if the friends that you're around don't make you want to ask questions, that's another good identifier that you're probably around people that don't really excite you or gas you up that much.
Yeah, one of the biggest struggles / biggest benefits that I've had in my own life over the last probably 5, 6, 7 years or so is letting go of toxic friends. And it's very, very difficult. And I might get into, down the line, something I've done and how I went about it. But it was the biggest non-linear progression in my life because you ended up making more time and room for other people who were more supportive and who were a better fit for your friendship. But how would you advise, Chris, people that are listening to this podcast now are thinking, yeah, I've got that friend, you know, Mary, Sarah, John, Jack, they're super negative. They're what I call, similar to what you said, they're friends by geography, you know, friends by familiarity. You're friends with them because they live beside you or they work with you, but you wouldn't be friends with them in any other environment per se. How would you recommend, or even if you want to use your own life as an example, again, totally up to you, for those who are struggling to let go of those particular friends or those individuals they're thinking of, what would you say to them, those people?
I think that you need to work out whether or not that person adds anything to your life. This sounds very Machiavellian, right? It sounds like you're just saying, just cut out anybody that doesn't add value. That's not the same. It's cut out anybody that makes your life actively worse. And that's not your job. Your job is not to be there as some sort of social punching bag for some person that you and them don't have anything in common, to just waste hours and days with. Think about the fact that you don't care about them in the same way that you should, and they're not making your life as good as they should. So let them go, the same way as being in a bad relationship. In terms of making the transition, the problem is we don't actually know who are the toxic people in our lives because we're so blind to almost all of our motivations. You know, increasingly this year, I've read a lot of evolutionary psychology, and we are completely ignorant to what we want, to what we want, to why we feel the way that we do, to why we resonate with some people and not with others. All of this stuff. And we believe that we are crew aboard Spaceship Human, but we're not. We're cargo. We are cargo on the ride, and everything else is taking us along. So consider how you feel after you spend time with people. If you feel bad, if it doesn't make you feel better, the same as a training session. If your training session, after you've finished, doesn't make you feel better, I'm relieved, I feel good about myself, I'm walking out of the gym, that's the best heuristic. You know, we can delve into how's it affected my HRV and look at my sleep quality and all this stuff, but your phenomenological qualia sense of life is the best indicator. Does it make you feel good to be around this person? Yes, keep them in your life. Does it not? Slowly phase them out. Finding new friends is hard, but there is an internet of people out there. Reddit, I know it's got some weird rabbit holes, but it's a fantastic place to start because there is a subculture for everything out there. Start finding a YouTube channel that you care about and contact the person that makes it. Like that's some of my best friends now listened to Modern Wisdom, my podcast, 2.5 years ago, and reached out and said, hey man, it really sounds like me and you are on the same sort of track. Have you got time for a coffee at some point? And I'd meet them when I go to Manchester. And I just went to Dubai for a month with one of them, George. He's now one of my best mates. So you can find people out there that are like you. And given the choice between honesty and acceptability, you need to choose honesty. Because if you continue to compromise yourself for the rest of your life, not only will you end up at a place that you don't want to be, but you'll be in a place that you didn't even mean to get to.
That gives me a perfect segue, because I think what struggles, or one of the main struggles for people, is the amount of value or weight that they give to people's opinions. And one of the things that you talk about is don't value most people's opinions, that you actually don't, that's not what you value. You do fear their criticism though. Can you expand on that?
Yeah. We naturally don't want to move down the hierarchy, right? Like someone, when you're in a group of people and someone makes a joke at your expense, that sensation where you feel kind of hot in the neck and in the face and your shoulders come up, you can almost hear it. You can almost hear the embarrassment. Here's a funny story. So I'm in Bali and I'm riding a moped, like a 50 pence a day moped, which is like dumb. I should have got something more expensive and obviously not totally broken. Driving along, a truck pulls out, so I have to pull the brakes. Turns out that the back brake doesn't work at all, and the front brake's the only one that goes. So that locks on, so the back end of the bike starts to slide. Same as you remember this as a kid, if you ever did the front brake on gravel and the back end would start to come out. And I'm thinking, right, I can either like hold on to this and slide underneath the truck, or I can let go and straighten back up and hit the back of the truck. And I'm like, that's a bad idea. So I held on, came off the bike. I was wearing tiny swim shorts and a vest, hit the Balinese road at like 20 miles an hour and just removed all of the skin from like one side of my body, whole top of my foot, side of my leg, elbow, shoulder, everything. And the first sensation that I felt, remembering that I've just fairly badly injured myself, sort of 2nd-degree burns on a ton of my body. Half of my skin is left in the middle of this small street in Bali, picking it out of the tarmac. And the first sensation that I felt wasn't fear for my own safety. It wasn't a worry or a concern about whether or not I was going to be okay in the future in terms of my health. The first thing I felt was embarrassment and shame, because I had a group of buddies there with me, a couple of Australian lads who understood how to ride motorbikes, and they came over and they're like, fucking hell, mate, are you okay? Are you okay? And I was like, yeah, I'm fine, let's keep going. Like, hop back on the bike in tons and tons of pain. The first thing I felt, it was so powerful that above physical, critical injury was embarrassment and shame. That's how powerful of an emotion it is. So, given the fact that we place such a high value on how we feel when we're embarrassed or criticized by other people within a group, it makes sense that we avoid it at all costs. And that causes us to get very confused. A lot of the time, people do things because they fear criticism by a person whose opinion they don't care about. And this is what I talk about a lot, which is stepping into your programming. You have this particular set of genetics that are trying to get you to survive and reproduce, even if it makes you miserable. And it doesn't care if it makes you miserable. If you manage to survive and reproduce, your genes will get passed on, no matter whether you have the most awful, melancholy, destructive life that you can imagine. So, step into your own programming and think, when you get criticized by somebody, when somebody makes a joke at your expense or you feel silly, do I actually care about what that person thinks? Or do I just have an aversion to criticism generally? Because there's a big difference between that. Criticism generally just triggers, it forgets the person that's giving it, and it's all about the sensation of feeling it. And think about the person that gives it. For instance, I'm sure that you get it as well on the internet. Someone will pipe up and say something which they don't like about this podcast, or they don't like about you having that guest on. And then another person can pop up and say precisely the opposite thing about the same episode. It was too fast-paced or it was too slow. That guest was too left-wing or too right-wing. You talk too much about fitness. I wish you talked more about fitness. And what it teaches you, what the internet teaches you, is that you just need to do the thing that you're there to do. You can take opinions and contributions from people who you care about, but for the most part, you don't value the opinions of the people who are giving you criticism. And with that in mind, you shouldn't take heed of it. I know it's really hard. It feels so uncomfortable. It makes us feel silly and stupid and like we're worthless. But if you just take that moment, just breathe and allow the mindfulness gap to just slot in between seeing something and think, I'm laughing here because I've started to drill this response of when I read something, I just imagine the person that's written it smashing their cheesy fingers into the keyboard about I don't like the fact that you said this about my football team, or you did a thing about my gym. And you're like, it's when you can relinquish yourself from that. And it does take time, it takes training, and obviously it's easier for somebody who's constantly getting lots and lots of comments that are quite easy to read and are also usually pretty stupid. But at work, think about the person who's 2 layers below you, the junior that decides to criticize your work. Why do you care about what that person says? They've been in the job for 2 weeks. Why do you care about what the guy, you're a sportsman? Why do you care about what the guy on some ultra-endurance triathlon forum says about your predictions for what's going to happen next year? He's sat in the stands, you're on the stadium floor. And if that's the price that you have to pay, if the price you have to pay to be on the stadium floor is to receive criticism from people in the stands, then so be it, because I would take being on the stadium floor every single day over being that guy abusing the best athletes or the people that are trying to make the most of it in the world just sat in the stands.
What was the biggest thing that allowed you to build that stadium floor mindset? Was it a combination of different podcasts you were listening to, books, reflections in yourself, therapy? What led you to the point? Because that, for a lot of people, is a very positive and very supportive mindset to have, that I'm in the stadium, fuck the guy in the stand shouting at me. And that's it's a metaphor for, weight loss. It's a metaphor for, changing career. It's a metaphor for relationships, whatever it is. I know Jordan Peterson talks about it, that, if you're not playing all in, you shouldn't have a say. How did you go about building that stadium floor mindset?
Stephen Pressfield has 2 books, one called The War of Art and another one called Turning Pro. And the stadium floor analogy is from Turning Pro. It'll take you less than an hour and a half to read, even if you're as slow of a reader as I am. For each of the books, they're both really short and they're so powerful. Especially if you've got them on Kindle, you'll be highlighting like every other page. It's kind of embarrassing. And in that, he just talks forever about the professional is the person who shows up at work. The amateur is the one who shows up when he feels like it. I'm a professional. I turn up for my podcasts early because a professional turns up early. He doesn't turn up on time. I always have my same routine before I get going because I want to be the best podcaster that you can find in Europe. That's my goal. That's what I want to do, and I'm prepared to do everything. I'm all in on that. And I understand that if you haven't found the thing that you feel like you can give yourself to, this goes back to the purpose and meaning discussion we had in the very beginning. If you haven't found that thing, then it's kind of like you're spinning in first gear with all of this latent potential that you're building up inside of you, and you feel like you want to deploy it on something, but you don't have that thing. So continue to explore, expose yourself to new people, get rid of the toxic friends, travel to new places, have adventures, say yes to as many new adventures as you can, because you will find that thing. And when you're able to deploy that motivation, it'll make such a difference. But yeah, the analogy around having faith in yourself, having confidence that what you want to do is what you should be doing, is Turning Pro and The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield.
Yeah, both fantastic books. The War of Art is actually one of the books that any time somebody tells me that they're writing a book, I'm like, yeah, you read The War of Art. That's one of the, like, it's just because it's just constantly talking about the resistance and just fucking showing up. Like, and I have to re-listen to it and reread it when I'm like, book deadlines are coming. I'm like, Brian, just show up, just get it done. So they're 2 great recommendations for people. I want to kind of stay on that for a minute though, just because you're clearly over the last few years, the amount of work you've done in yourself, and I know this from listening to your podcast, and even more so now as you're speaking, as we're speaking directly, that you consume a lot of very thought-provoking content, either through your own podcast with guests or the books that you read. Like, I saw your book stack and we've got so many similar books, it's absolutely crazy. It literally looks like my book library at home. But I'm curious, and you can go in whatever direction you want with this, Chris, what's one of the things that you've changed your mind about most in recent years? And as somebody that is very similar to you in the sense that I read a lot of books, I've changed my mind about so many different things because, you know, it's the curse of knowledge. The more you know, the less you realize you know. But what's one of the biggest things you've changed your mind about?
Certainly the stadium floor thing is a big part of it. I think deep down I'm fairly unconfident. I was like heavily bullied in school. I was an only child. I spoke differently. I don't sound like I'm from the northeast of the UK. So I was inherently unconfident, and that has been a very, very slow deprogramming. For me to step in and really kind of work around that has taken time. And that stadium floor analogy from Stephen Pressfield is one of the huge, huge parts of what I've done. Another thing goes back to the crew versus cargo analogy I made about evolution and our genetics, especially for the people listening who are classically introverted, cerebral, overthinkers. They've got a strong inner monologue. They worry about things, probably got a little bit of sort of low level anxiety as well, just about, you know, concerns about the future, and maybe a bit empathic, and they cry easily, or they feel upset easily. I presumed that because I'd done all of that self-inquiry, that I understood all of my motivations. And I cannot explain to you just how little you understand about why you are the way you are. And there is no point in your life that you're going to fully be able to understand all of the different motivations. And this has 2 sides to it. The first one is the more correct, mindful, emotionally intelligent, well-written content that speaks to you in a language that you understand, that you can expose yourself to, the better you will be. The choice in life is between becoming aware of our mental afflictions or becoming ruled by them. Becoming aware of our mental afflictions or becoming ruled by them. That's the choice that you've got. So you need to spend some time working, listening to stuff. Find the person that speaks to you. Brian Keane Fitness, Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, Sam Harris, whoever it might be. The second part of it is to actually use the opposite end of that and trust just the way that you feel. This goes back to the training analogy or the friend analogy. You can try and work out all the different motivations that you have around, and I would do this. This is a big change I've had over the last year. I would try and cerebrally rationalize down in the most utilitarian way possible just exactly why that I do that thing, and these are the reps, and this is the, classic overthinking mindset. But it all just came down to, do I feel good around this person or do I not? Do I feel good when I have to get up and go train or do I not? Do I wake up on a morning and feel like I'm gassed to go after this particular project or speak to this guest on the podcast or do whatever the tasks are that I have to do, or do I not? And really, it all comes down to that. And it's this concept from, did you ever read His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman? They made it into the Northern Lights and the Amber Spyglass. It's like a kid's book, but it's quite epic.
Yeah, I've read the Northern Lights. So I think that's the height of, I'm not a big fiction reader. That was one of my, I'd say, 7 fiction books that I've ever read.
Got you. So in that, the female protagonist, she is able to do this thing with reading this particular type of compass that reads the truth. And then she hits puberty and she loses the ability to do it. And then she works over time to be able to get it back. And she's sitting down. It's at the end of the book, the end of this 3 trilogy series. And I remember this, man. I learned this when I was 13, and I've only just realized at 32 precisely how much wisdom's in it. And it talks about the journey from unconscious competence to unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence to conscious competence. You can imagine it as a sort of a bell curve distribution. And that is how almost everything works. You said it earlier on, the more you know you don't know. But over time, you can wrangle that back around. And this is the curse of the overthinker. Everyone that's listening that thinks too much, like, first off, I'm part of your crew. We're all here together. We're all one big family. And secondly, you can get it under control by barbelling the strategy, by taking heed of the way that you feel in a very simplistic way, and also by learning to understand your motivations by exposing yourself to the right content regularly.
I love that. You had my friend Marcus Smith on your podcast recently, and he talks about accepting and rejecting. And, when it comes to overthinking or anxiety, that you accept this is how you're feeling, but you reject that you're going to let it consume you or you're going to let it affect your behavior. And I think it's a very effective tool with that barbell strategy you mentioned. I definitely want to unpack the unconfidence a little bit. Not so much that in particular, but when you were speaking about deprogramming and that you were naturally unconfident from being bullied, again, something I totally connect with. I was the exact same when I was a teenager. But I read over lockdown the Steven Pinker book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, I think it's called. And there's a section in there that talks about first nature, second nature, third nature. I'm not sure, are you familiar with
No, tell me.
Yeah, so first nature he talks about is human nature, so all the things that are innately within us. So if you read a lot of evolutionary psychology, so sex, or drive for sex, or drive for food, or drive for water, etc., the things that are innately that make us human, they're first nature, they're human nature. His second nature, he talks about the things that we have learned over time, so our confidence levels, the way we are around people, the things that our childhood, our traumas, our behaviors, our environment, our experience have molded us, the second nature. And the third nature is the unlearning of all the things that we've learned and conditioned ourselves to do over time. And that visualization has always helped. It's really helped me since I started reading that book. Again, didn't get as much from the book, but that particular section, because it made me realize that there's a lot of experiences and behaviors and core belief systems that I had that I need to really unlearn. I'm like, these aren't very supportive now when I'm 33 years of age. I'm like, that kept me going when I was 16. That kept me going when I was 23. I'm like, this isn't very helpful when I'm in my early 30s. And you're in the process of unlearning and deprogramming, as you mentioned. But I'm curious, is there anything at the minute that you're currently trying to unlearn?
Certainly still along this path of not caring about criticism. As your platform grows and as more people get exposed to your content, inevitably the comments go up with that, and the wider world of the internet is absolutely savage. So I need to learn around that. Learning to not overthink. The tighter and tighter circles that we're talking about here, we're learning about learning. We're learning about deprogramming. We're deprogramming our desire to deprogram, even that, trying to be in control so much. Yeah, I certainly think that for me, it's removing the need to overthink and also remove the need for desires. Desire is a contract we make with ourselves to be unhappy until we get what we want. It's Naval Ravikant. And I truly think that that's correct. We always think I will be happy when ... I get that job, I get that car, I move to that new town. I find a wife, husband that cares about me. I have completed my degree. I have done whatever it might be, got to this level of wealth. And when that moment comes, we don't want it. We want the next thing, because that's what hedonic adaptation does. And at its base level, learning to not even let the desire creep in is something that I want to be able to get closer to, certainly over the next year. I had a good example. The YouTube channel, Modern Wisdom, subscribe here, link below, is about to hit 100,000 subs. And I'll get the big silver plaque and I'll feel really accomplished and stuff like that. And I was talking to my video guy and he was saying, so what's the goal for next year? And originally I totally forgot everything that I've just told you there. And I was like, yeah, well, so let's go for like 250 because that's the same growth rate that we've done year on year. So 250,000 subs by December. And that'll be mint because then when we do that, if we do that, then it'll be like 600 by the end of year 2. And I sort of slowed myself down and I thought, what are you talking about? Like that's, first off, that's not even why you're here. So what do you want to want? I don't want 1 million subs on YouTube. I want to make the best, inspiring, sense-making content, mindful, emotionally intelligent videos that I can. That's my goal. So what are you talking about subscribers for? Like why? Because we are built on desires. That's why we're teleological beings, telos, Greek for target. Like we create a target and then we constantly check how much closer we're getting toward it or further away from it. I'm like, what am I doing? Step into your programming. You don't need 250,000 subscribers. You need to make the best videos that you can constantly, and whatever happens outside of that will happen. So that's a personal example.
The high end of control the controllables. I think for those listening who have weight loss goals, fat loss goals, body compositional goals, it's the exact same thing. It's the I'll be happy when fallacy, that you're constantly telling yourself that I'll be happy when I hit X amount of weight on the scale, or I'll be happy when I'm at Y dress size, or I'll be happy when I, have Z amount of abs in my six pack. Like that, constantly working towards that. As you said, a desire is a contract you make with yourself to be unhappy until you get the thing that you want. And I think that's so true. I'm just, to stay on that for a second, kind of personally, as somebody that is very similar to you, Chris, who defaults into my programming of expectation, ambition. I call it the tiger of ambition. That I have to picture an analogy of, I read this in one of Felix Dinnis's books about, how to get rich. Worst title ever for a book, but a fantastic read. And, he talks about the tiger of ambition, that a tiger is a great thing and an awesome pet to have if it's under control. But if you turn your back on it, it's going to rip your face off. My words, not his. But it's that you need to keep control of that. And I think desire is a funny one because, and I'm speaking from personal experience here, of not letting go of ambition and working towards the things you want, but also not being so emotionally attached to them that they control you to the point that you're unhappy and miserable just because you're not meeting the unrealized expectations that you've set for yourself. How do you stay in that balance between the two? So, and the reason I ask is, the other end of the spectrum is, don't desire anything, don't have any goals, don't go after anything. And that's not what either of us are saying here. Like, definitely not. You're a very high achiever, Chris. You do loads of things between the podcast, the articles you write, the content you provide people. So you clearly have that balance right because you're able to check in with the fact that I'm desiring now, I don't need 250,000 subscribers. I know why I'm doing this. How do you keep that balance between not slacking off, but equally not being owned by that concept of desire that makes you miserable until you get the thing that you think that you want?
Man, this is a question that I've battled with for a very, very long time. And I've asked some of the smartest people that I've ever met. I asked Ryan Holiday this question, and he didn't have an answer. It is the messy middle. The virtuous mean, as Seneca called it, is the most difficult thing that we have as humans. We're creatures of extremes. A lot of the people that are listening will be into their health and fitness, perhaps have some fat loss goals. If I was to say to you that you can eat one biscuit out of this packet of biscuits, it would be impossible. If I say you can eat none or all of them, it's really easy. So we're creatures of extremes, and finding that messy middle is super, super hard. This is the one thing that I think James Clear got wrong in Atomic Habits, one of my favorite books. I'm sure it'll be yours as well. The thing that he got wrong, or the thing that he missed off, is an emphasis on the power of goals. So goals are fantastic at motivating us in a direction. It is important. Why do so many people set goals at the beginning of the year? Because they feel motivated, and the goal requires, it gives us a longitude and a latitude to aim for, right? This is the heading that I'm going on. We need to know that that goal is where we are aiming, but that as soon as we've done that, we need to focus on the process. Again, I'm sure it's trite for me to say this to your audience who'll know this through and through, but it probably bears repeating, that your outcomes in life are a lagging measure of your daily habits. Your body composition is a lagging measure of your training and your diet habits. Your financial makeup is a lagging measure of your earning and spending habits. Your intellectual capacity, your knowledge is a lagging measure of your daily reading and consumption habits, and so on, all the way down. Now, you can say that I want to be able to understand this many things by the end of the year. That's great. That gives you a direction to aim in. But how are you going to do it? I'm going to create a process every single day. I'm going to read 10 pages a day. 10 pages a day will get you, whatever, 10 books a year, something like that. So at the end of this year, you've read 10 books. That's awesome. The goal was to get smarter. The process did help you achieve that. But the process was the important thing. Without goals, processes, as far as I'm concerned, have no meaning, because a process without a goal is just you spinning in circles, doing things really fast, but not necessarily going in the direction that you want. So it's a difficult thing to get right. Detaching your sense of being from the achievement of the goal, knowing that you are enough without achieving the goal, but knowing that it is great if you can do it. And it's so hard to as soon as you say, well, if I'm enough without the goal, what's the point in moving towards the goal? That's a hard question to answer. But focusing on the process is important. So for instance, going back to my example about creating the best videos, the process goal that I created for myself was, by the end of February, I want to be able to publish one video every 2 weeks, because I know that it's going to take me time to get in the process of writing a script and coming up with ideas. And then the video guy needs to learn about how editing it and the timing of releasing it and stuff like that. Okay. And then by the end of April, May, I want to be up to one a week. And if I'm up to one a week by the end of May, I know that by the end of the year, I will be where I need to be, which is a goal of creating the best mindful content that I can. So I've taken a goal, which is loosely held, but something that I genuinely feel passionate about. And I've broken it down into weekly actions. Any large accomplishment is just a collection of smaller tasks made up by micro tasks, made up by daily actions. That's all anything is. You running MDS, Marcus doing 30 marathons in 30 days. All that was one foot in front of the other. It's just one foot in front of the other for a really long time.
So true. Yeah, and every goal can be broken in, and something that I talk about in this podcast, because ironically there's only a handful of people who are similar to me in the sense that they do ultra marathons or endurance events, and I always say it's the exact same for weight loss, or it's the same for building a strong relationship with a family member or a romantic partner or a career. You know, you're an entrepreneur, Chris, so you get this. It's what you do daily adds up. It's tell me what you do every day and I'll tell you where you'll be in a year, and that comes down to your daily habits. You mentioned, you know, James Clear's book there, fantastic book, Atomic Habits. You mentioned Ryan Holiday. I'm curious on, this might not be from the podcast, but I'm assuming, or I'm going to make the assumption that it possibly will be, just because you've had some fantastic guests on the show. What's the best advice you were ever given? Or was there any message? You don't necessarily have to say favorite podcast or best episode, because that's completely subjective based on, you know, your opinion. Other people that are listening will have other favorites. That's just the way life is. But what was the best advice that you received, either directly or through somebody sharing or sprouting their truth that connected with you?
Man, there's been so much. Like, I feel so fortunate and blessed to be able to speak to the people that I do. Certainly, Eric Jorgensen, the guy who created the Almanac of Naval Ravikant, which is available for free at navalmanac.com. If anybody wants to go and check it out, I highly recommend it. It's the densest book that I've ever heard. And some of the stuff from that, desire is a contract you make with yourself to be unhappy until you get what you want. If you can't be happy with a coffee, you won't be happy with a yacht. A lot of things around letting go of attachments. Aubrey Marcus probably had something that hit home the hardest, because it kind of bookended that particular transition I talked about earlier on from persona to person. You know, I was this sort of big name on campus, and everybody knew me in Newcastle, and I've conquered this, and I was very, very sort of ego driven and very externalized, very concerned about what other people thought about me, and I wasn't embracing my truth, and I was speaking my logos forward. And Aubrey said, the persona is incapable of receiving love, it can only receive praise. And he hypothesized that this is why a lot of actors have mental health problems. Because people don't love Chris Hemsworth, they love Thor. People don't love Russell Crowe. They love Maximus, Claudius, whatever he was. Diaz, that guy. Yeah, Gladiator. They love Gladiator. You know, that really hit home because I was someone who'd hidden his true nature for a very long time. Like, I can't talk to people on the front door of a nightclub about whether the Fermi paradox is actually the reason that we haven't found alien civilizations yet is explained by the great filter hypothesis put forward by Robin Hanson. I can't ask whether sex robots are actually ethical. Like, these aren't the sort of questions that I can deploy on the front door.
You'd probably swing that second one in a nightclub. I think that one would probably go down a treat.
Might go down all right, yeah. So for a long time, I just nerfed all of the interesting edges of me. I hadn't stayed weird. I'd stayed normal. And that had caused me to live this persona. It meant that when someone said something nice about me, I didn't feel like it was about me. I felt like it was about the role that I was playing. And that for a very long time actually becomes a vicious cycle because you don't feel praise. You don't feel love, you only feel praise. So in a desperate attempt to try and get more love, you try and be extra at the thing that you're being, which is a persona which isn't you, which pushes you further and further away from receiving any love. And just praise comes in, easy come, easy go. So yeah, the persona cannot receive love, it can only receive praise, by Aubrey Marcus. That was a big one.
Yeah, it reminds me it's that you're not being the Wizard of Oz anymore. You're the sweaty man behind the curtain. Like, that's straight. Like, the sooner you realise that your life tends to get significantly better, I have to remind myself of it daily.
That's awesome.
One of the last thing I want to ask you, Chris, and I've absolutely loved this conversation. I know you go a good bit longer on your podcast, and that's one of my favorite things. It's a real deep dive, but we've got so much to digest from what you've said today. But I just want to ask one final question, because your podcast, your commitment to putting out the videos, the things that are helping make people think, and I think that's the thing I connect with the most about your content. Like, very rarely have I listened to an episode of your podcast and not came out the other side with some question that I've realized I need to ask myself, either from something that you've said or from something one of the guests have said. And I think that compounds very positively over time if you're doing that consistently. So with that in mind, what do you want your tombstone to say?
Oh God, no small question. I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm very bad at long-term planning. This is something that I need to get past. And perhaps this, you know, I can usually talk for England, but the fact that I'm reticent and struggling at coming up with something that my tombstone says might actually speak to people listening who don't have that big grand plan. And if that's you, then fine, you know, like, join the club, because I don't really know what it's going to be. I know that every time I learn something about the world or myself, my life gets better. I know that the more that I tell the truth and that I understand where my honesty comes from and that I speak that forward, my life gets better. And it makes the lives of people around me better as well. I know the more that I step into my own programming, the less that I'm at the mercy of my unconscious desires and my genetic predisposition and the social norms and way I've dealt with past traumas and all that stuff. My life continues to get better. So he told the truth, man. Like, that's the closest that I can get at the moment. But if you don't know what your long-term plan is, then that's absolutely fine. Vast majority of people don't. And the ones that do might just not know what they want to want.
I love that. As I said, I think it's funny because that's something that I check back in with a lot. That's one of those questions that I regularly come back to and can regularly have different answers to.
What is your answer at the moment?
He loved his family and his family loved him.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's it just kind of speaks to again, what I try and prioritize and what I try and have as the highest value as somebody who, and you might connect with this, Chris, just from your previous lifestyle, not dissimilar to mine, just not at the highest end, was I had a lot of junk values, that I had way too much weight given to the way that I looked or the money that I made or my reputation around people whose, for the lack of a better way of expressing it, whose opinions didn't matter. And that brought me to the point now that I'm very mindful of the people who will cry when I die and making sure that they're the highest priority and the highest value in my life. So that's something I come back to, but I think it's a useful question for some. You know, I love how it's both sides. I'm very cemented on that. But you're, as you said, this is something you can think about or you've thought about. And for everyone that's in between, some are going to be like you, some are going to be like me, and some are going to be in between.
We got that barbell going on. I will say, I think that when I start a family, like I can't wait to be a dad. And this is a whole nother conversation that maybe we can have another time. But I absolutely can't wait to be a dad. And for the young guys out there who haven't yet got a family but can't wait to start one, like that's an archetype that I think we're going to see talked about an awful lot more, especially as we get into 2021. People need their families around them. They need that sense of belonging. And young single guys now aren't just trying to shag everything that moves. That's not the way it works. And if you're a girl listening who's in her 20s and is ready to settle down and thinks like, where are all the good men at? Like, they are out there, I promise you. And they want families as well. And they want to be the best dads that they can. And I think that I am wholly unprepared for the level of love and commitment that I'm going to give to my kids when they finally get here, when I find the right woman and I sit down and we have a family. I reckon that my answer will probably not be far off yours, man, because like everybody that I know says the same thing. And I don't know whether I'm ready for it. I genuinely don't. Like, I want it, but I'm kind of scared of the level of emotions, the intensity that are going to come.
I love that. What an amazing way to finish this podcast, Chris. For everybody listening, where is the best place for them to connect with you? Where can they listen to the podcast? And anywhere you want to send them, please share that now.
Cool. So Chris Williamson, wherever you follow me, at Chris Will X, Instagram, Twitter, etc. Modern Wisdom on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. And if you want to download my ultimate life hacks list, which is over 200 ways that you can upgrade your life for free, just go to chriswillx.com/lifehacks. That'll also sign you up to my 3-Minute Monday newsletter, where I try and improve your life in 3 minutes or less every week. And Brian, man, thank you so much for bringing me on. Marcus said that it was going to be an awesome episode, and he wasn't wrong.
Love it, mate. I can't thank you enough. And for everybody listening, what Chris has just mentioned, the website, the life hacks, that's something that we didn't even get onto today. So maybe around 2, we'll definitely dive into the life hacks for sure. I will link those in the show notes on briankeenfitness.com. And for everybody where you're listening to podcasts, check the description. You can click straight on through to everything that Chris has just mentioned. Mate, this was absolutely awesome. I love this conversation. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
So there you have it, Chris Williamson on getting over the fear of criticism, making sure your friends don't suck, and the I'll be happy win fallacy. This one was definitely a paper and a pen episode to take notes on what was jumping out. The purple polar bears that I called them, the things that connected with you for a reason that you may not be certain of. So I talk about that in Rewire Your Mindset. And yeah, I got loads from this one myself, definitely going back with the pen and piece of paper myself. So that's everything from today's episode. If you enjoyed it, be sure to take a screenshot, pop it on your Instagram story, and you can tag Chris and I in your Instagram stories. Let us know what you thought. That's everything from this week's episode. Catch you all next Monday.